Hi, I'm Scott Hennig, President and CEO of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Welcome to Q&A. Today, my guest is Scott Moe, Premier of Saskatchewan. Prior to seeking elected office, Moe was a businessman, a farmer, and a salesperson. He was first elected as a Saskatchewan Party MLA in the 2011 election and served in Premier Brad Wall's cabinet as Minister of Environment, Minister of Advanced Education. In 2018, Scott won the leadership of the Sask Party and became the 15th Premier of Saskatchewan. As Premier, his party has won 2 majority governments, both in 2020 and 2024. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much, Scott, for making time.
Oh, of course. Let's start where you started. Let's go back to you're oldest of 5 kids.
Oldest of 5 children.
Grew up near Shellbrook, Saskatchewan, on a farm.
Grew up on a farm there, yes.
I assume you know your way around a tractor too.
We've doing tractor and all of the other stuff.
What was it like growing up in Shellbrook?
It was fabulous. I mean, it's a typical small town, and many that didn't grow up in a small town might not know what that means. But it's just it really brings new meaning to. If you've ever heard the term coined, it takes a village to raise a child. That's how small town Saskatchewan is. Is everyone is chipping in to help guide one another's kids to opportunity, really. And in Saskatchewan's case, that opportunity is finally arriving.
That's very good. You played baseball, hockey as a kid, coached, assuming you coached your kids as they were coming up?
Yeah, we did. We whether they're in hockey, baseball, I couldn't do the dance. I couldn't coach the dance. But we were so very fortunate not only to be raised in Shellbrook, Saskatchewan, but we had the opportunity to raise our children there as well, which was a choice. We couldn't be more blessed.
So your parents, were they politically active? Like, is that how you got your bug in getting into politics?
They were quieter about it. They're always voting. Didn't talk a lot of politics. However, my grandfather was a campaign as a volunteer for John Diefenbaker.
No, really?
Back in the day. And so on my mother's side, and now I never met him. He passed away before I was here, but he definitely passed it on. My father was quieter about it, but my uncle has been very involved for literally decades, and I've had many great political conversations with him about my late grandfather. Back in the days, campaigning for then the Prime Minister.
Very interesting. It's always interesting to find how people kind of find their way through. Right after high school, you left Saskatchewan, went up to Yellowknife. You built houses for a little while. Actually picking up a hammer and working on houses, does that give you any sort of additional insight on the housing crisis that's facing a lot of Canadian cities these days?
It does. And so sometimes there's a lack of housing for different reasons. At that point in time, it was 1991 in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. There was housing, I wouldn't say a crisis, but there's really a need for new housings there, just simply because there wasn't enough, because there were so many people working in the community. There was gold mines operating at that point. It was a launch pad to northern jobs and communities on the Dew Line, it was known as that time, as well as Yellowknife very much, and is today, the center of government for the Northwest Territories. And so there was, in its own way, a real shortage of housing at that point in time. Now, it was different than maybe what we're facing in affordable housing in some of our large urban centers today, but the premise is just the same. And I think from a policy perspective, you need to understand why and what type of housing you need, and maybe some supports in the case today around that housing need, in the policies that are being developed by various levels of government. It isn't just as simple as building a house and they will come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Like many people from Saskatchewan, you spent a bit of time in Alberta working at one point.
Too many people.
Yeah. That is true. But living there and working there, what differences do you think there are between Albertans and Saskatchewanians?
Not a lot, really. I often say we're always going to be natural allies politically with Alberta because of how we generate wealth. Both of us have this, I call it the great rural-urban synergy, where we have these natural resources, whether it be oil, whether it be ag land, whether it be, potash, uranium, mine products. They're all in rural areas of our province, whether it be Saskatchewan or Alberta, or even into Manitoba to some degree. and the interior of British Columbia. But it's people that live in our towns, villages, our cities that really help develop and add value to those products and bring them to the global market, whether that be through innovation, tech, all that happens there. And so, people talk about, rural-urban divides in places like Saskatchewan and Alberta, and I think it's actually a synergy, and it has always been our strength, and we need to maybe work a little harder at realizing that.
Mm. So you were in, what years were you in Alberta?
2000 to 2003. That's actually where I became politically interested, you might say.
Okay, was that the kind of the end of the Klein government? Well, middle end of Klein government. Does that kind of got you interested?
Ralph Klein was very popular premier at that point, and that is why I started to pay attention to politics. But more specific, where I was in Vermilion was a time when Ralph Klein's finance minister of the day, Steve West, was retiring.
Yes.
And there was a new guy that was running for a nomination in that constituency, and his name was Lloyd Snowgrove.
Of course, yeah.
Then became the finance minister under not only Ralph, but Ed Stelmach as well. And so that's where I really became interested in politics and really started to understand in my own way that, the policy decisions that politicians are making really do matter. And I started to contrast what the decisions, for instance, Premier Klein was making with what was happening in Saskatchewan at that time. And they were very different.
Right, yeah. Steve West,
legendary to this day.
Yeah, privatized the liquor stores. Very, very big in Alberta. So 2003, you headed back to Saskatchewan. You immediately got involved with the Sask Party. Was that your first foray into sort of partisan politics?
The first foray is actively involved, and I would say that started in Vermilion, just with some admiration for the Klein government and Steve West and Lloyd Snellgrove more locally. And my realization that the policies that are being brought forward by governments, they really do matter. I said earlier I had an uncle that my grandfather and his father was politically involved with the Diefenbaker campaigns. Through some discussions with my uncle, I very quickly became involved with the Saskatchewan Party locally and on our constituency association, and it just kind of grew from there.
Mm-hmm. So you picked the Sask Party. You came back, picked the Sask Party. Could have picked the NDP. Could have picked a different party. Why the Sask Party?
I actually couldn't have.
Yeah. Fair. All right, fair.
David, it was as you delve into the policies and I was volunteering in my community and things that were important to my children but also important to our community. When you start working at building up, there really is only one choice for where your political alliances or allegiances can land.
Yeah, fair point. Well, speaking of that, how do you describe your own political philosophy? Are you more of a traditional conservative, social conservative, fiscal conservative, libertarian, pragmatist, populist? Like how do you describe yourself?
Maybe a little bit of all of those. We're trying to find our way to a balanced budget all the time, each and every year, and we were able to this year. Probably is the only balanced budget in the nation of Canada this year, and so fiscal conservative is important, but not at any cost either. And I think there are times where you have to, veer off that rigid goal from time to time because you're also there to provide services for folks and whatnot. I think when it comes to things like social conservatism and others, there is and I have a great belief that there is the role for in a children's life, the most important role models in a children's life is always their parents, and we need to refocus that. Not to a fault, but we need to have more of a focus with respect to the role that parents have in their children's life. And I said earlier, it does take a village, and we do all need to support one another, but without judgment to some degree as well, and allow parents to be parents in not only their home, but in their community, wherever their children may be. And so there's some of that as well, and so a little bit from everywhere. But I would say one that is one area that I think I focus on as much or more than maybe other leaders of this type is I call economic conservatism. I truly believe that one of the most fundamental things that a government can do is to build an environment and to have policy development that creates an environment that attracts investment, creates jobs, creates opportunity. And this may be a little bit of our history in Saskatchewan of, my entire graduating class, not the entire, but a large portion of them don't live in Saskatchewan anymore.
Right.
They live in Alberta, and they're part of that Rough Rider contingent that goes to the Calgary Stampeders football games and cheers for their hometown Saskatchewan Rough Riders. That isn't necessary anymore because of the environment that we're building in Saskatchewan. And I think that's so crucial, is to provide that opportunity for a career for our children and for that next generation, so that if they leave to Alberta or somewhere else, that's a choice. That's a choice. They can stay here and have a great career and raise their family. And by here, I mean our province of Saskatchewan. We haven't always had that chance. For 70 years, we were in what I call the lost years under a socialist reign and stagnant population growth, stagnant economic growth. And that's no longer the case in Saskatchewan. And so I think economic conservatism is really what is at the core of each and every policy. And that's the lens that I put on each and every policy that we bring forward. And then the backside of that, and I think the actual important side of having that strong economy, is what are you doing with the benefits? That's where investments in healthcare and education come in.
That's interesting. You talk about people leaving. I sat down and chatted with John Gormley a few months ago. He said the story that I like to tell is raise your hand if you know, and then you talk to a crowd. Raise your hand if you know what the standard graduation present was when sort of people your age were graduating. Luggage, right? And he said the people that are under 30 have no idea what that is now, and that's because things have changed.
Yeah, no idea. And the ones under 30 that do leave, and there is some, it's a choice.
Right.
And they all have a thought that they might come back.
Yeah. Oh, it's congratulations for that, for changing that whole thing with your province. I mean, it's significantly has shifted in the time that I've been with the organization for 20 years, and I've seen it shift in that period as well. So
what's interesting is it isn't me or even the government. It's the people's thinking has shifted. Yeah. It's really monumental what has happened, and it's exciting.
Yeah. I can feel that from one province away in Alberta, for sure. Was there I know we talked about your uncle and whatnot, but was there a book, a teacher, I guess you talked about Klein, but some thought leader that really fueled your political convictions at an early age?
There's probably a few. And it's actually interesting where this comes from. And, I'd read some political books and whatnot, and I'd read some, some books more for pleasure as well. I always loved Bob Proberte's book, Tough Guys book. If you haven't read it, you have to read it. It's a great book. And I just loved the way he played. So that was, one of my favorite books, as menial as it is. But when I used to read, various political books, I'd always try to read one from both sides of the spectrum. Right. And so if you remember back in the day when Jean Chrétien was prime minister and Paul Martin was, the heir apparent. And everyone knew that except maybe Jean Chrétien, and he made Paul wait a little longer. Right. All of that happened. And, there's a couple of interesting books, one written from each side on that. And it's, I always found that interesting, is if you're going to read a book from one perspective, is quickly find one, even if you don't agree with it, and read it from the other perspective as well. I read George W.'s has a book that's very interesting. And then Bill Clinton has one as well, which is, equally as interesting. I haven't done quite as much reading on the current president. I don't know if that book would make sense or what would be in there, but all of that, I find that interesting, is when you can have some balance in and some different perspectives. I think it helps you in your own policy development, because I think your policy development needs to be right policy as opposed to simply ideological policy, and it will stand the test of time if it is the right policy. But still to this day, the book that I like, and it's not deep reading, but if we talked about where my interest in politics began, was in Vermilion, Alberta, with the Conservative Party under Premier Ralph Klein. But it was written by Don Martin and King Ralph.
Great book. Yeah, that's a very good choice. You first ran for a nomination in 2011, 2011 election, ran against a sitting Sask Party MLA.
Yeah,
that's fairly unusual. You don't see a lot of that. What sort of prompted that decision? Made you decide, I have to get in the ring, I have to be a part of this team now?
And now that I am a Sask Party MLA, we don't encourage that.
Right.
And but it speaks to the grassroots of the party, and we don't stop it either. Yeah. And the people do need to be able to speak, whether that be at the party level, and if that isn't allowed, they certainly will at the ballot box. And so that was really a case of, as I said, I started started to get involved just prior to 03. I get interested, got involved as a volunteer. And as things progressed, I was volunteering in my community, volunteering in my region, trying to bring things, improve things at a community level. And then all of a sudden at a regional level. And I started to realize that, our communities are in a certain region and a province and a nation. We're going to succeed together or fail together. And if we have some of these old hockey battles that are going on that we'll win and you'll lose, and which is somewhat of what we see in North American negotiations today, that isn't the right approach. We need to win together and succeed together as communities in a region within a province, in each of our provinces, and then collectively as a nation. And so I got a little bit where I found myself running against an incumbent is I got quite far down in my own decision-making path on, whether or not I actually wanted to run for this position. And I found out that I did long before, and anyone else had made decisions about retirement and such. And so I was in before I realized it, and then I couldn't back the bus up, and away we went. So.
Well, congratulations. Worked out pretty good for you and for the province.
So far.
But tell me about that first nomination race. There are often sales competitions. Did your sales background really help you winning that, or was it more of an arrow war? Like, tell me about that first nomination.
100%. It does. And sales is about people. And for anyone that hasn't, spent some time like in Dale Carnegie or any of these courses that really are a little bit about self-reflection and how you engage. One thing I always found, whether it was selling yourself or selling something or selling an idea or a policy, is people have interests. And if we sit down and just you tell them what their interests are, you may get it right and you may not. Mm-hmm. If you ask a few questions first and identify and watch what the responses are, in a pretty short period of time, you can actually understand what the priorities of that individual is. And if you truly respect people around you and their ability to have their own set of priorities, which we all should do, you owe them that. In particular, myself and as a public representative, I owe them the time to explain to me, whether they realize it by answering questions or not, where their priorities lie. And then it's for me to actually, do what we can as a government to fulfill those. And that's the same in a nomination. It's the same in policy development and all of that. So that part is there. And then also I would say, the second piece that I learned, going through that has probably helped me, in elections, and everything that I've done since then, is once you realize what the priorities are and your direction is, to become just incredibly focused on what you can do well and the changes that you can make. There's a lot of things often that you can't control, whether it be in international trade relations or tariff discussions, things of that nature. There's things you can't control. You have to realize and understand what you can control and focus on that.
Mm-hmm. Very fair. After your nomination, first elected in 2011, what was the biggest learning curve, or what was something that surprised you after becoming MLA?
I was fairly well prepared, as I had, had some time as a volunteer. I had known a number of folks that were MLAs. We live a fair amount away from where our capital city is, so there's a fair amount of travel that's involved. My children were a little older. So I was fairly well prepared for what was going to happen, and I didn't have any, aspirations or intentions. Everybody would like to be in cabinet, but I just wanted to be there to make things better in my region and ultimately contribute to a stronger province. Because at that point in time in 2011, Saskatchewan was changing. Our economy was changing, our opportunities were changing. There was investment, as public and private investment starting to arrive in our community, something we hadn't seen for decades. And so it was a pretty exciting time. And it was at the very front end of what was and continues to be a pretty exciting time. And so really what I was focused on was, being a supportive role in ensuring that this doesn't ever back up. And, things have changed in the role that I've played over that period of time. But if there's one thing, and just for those that might be considering it, running it for public office at some point, please do consider it. It's important and it's challenging, but some of the most rewarding people and things you'll ever do are in this public life, and I can say that from experience. So please do consider it. But there is some there is some, sacrifices. And, I remember one, and it doesn't seem like much, but it meant a lot to me at the times. One thing I did overlook is I always coached my daughter's softball.
Right.
And it's in the spring. And we sit in the spring. And I wasn't able to coach when I was elected in 2011. And I remember at the time, we had another friend of mine did it, and he was probably a better coach than I ever was. But I remember at the time thinking, I missed that.
Yeah.
I missed that, and I miss coaching them. And outside of that, we played hockey on Sunday and Thursday nights. I was traveling Sunday and Thursday nights. And so I was quite likely going to be a defenseman, along Darnell Nurse and those folks for the Oilers. And I wasn't the pandemic that got my career as elected life.
Yeah, there you go. So later in your first term, Premier Wall taps you, asks you to be the Minister of Environment. Now, I've heard tales of a meeting you might have had with Trudeau's Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna.
Kathy.
Yeah, tell me that story. Tell me about that story about that meeting you had with her in Ottawa that day.
So they'd called us to Montreal, all the environment ministers, and it was a little bit different environment then. We were, somewhat of a lone holdout, not entirely, when it came to, this unconsulted carbon taxation policy that is finally meeting its demise some 8 years later. And we were going to discuss some of the, the 4 points that had put forward and were signed to by all of the premiers at what was called the Vancouver Declaration, which Premier Wall had signed a few months earlier. And that was the last, people talk about pan-Canadian climate change policy and things, the Liberals talk about it. That was the last policy. That's the last climate change document that was ever signed by each and every province of this nation, was the Vancouver Declaration, which set out to say, we'll work on these things together. We go to Montreal a few months later, sit down, and mid-morning, Catherine McKenna stands up and says, so the Prime Minister is going to rise in his place in the House of Commons, and he's going to say that each province has to implement a carbon tax policy, or we will. And I said, so, my immediate reaction was, so what are we doing here?
Right.
And why did you bring us to Montreal? I have other things I could be doing if you're just going to do this unconsulted anyway. And so that kicked off probably not only a fairly lively discussion that very day that has gone on for years now and should end before too long, as we're going to see the end of that policy. It's all but doomed. Just the only thing left is really the monument for the gravesite. But since then, we've seen that same tact taken, whether it be the changes to the environmental impact assessment, whether it be the tanker ban bill on the West Coast, whether it be the oil and gas production cap, whether it be the metrics that are put forward on electric vehicle purchases, all unconsulted policy, entirely focused in their own mind on what is environmental policy, and it's poor environmental policy, by the way, with no. And as I'll quote Premier Wall, with no economic analysis done on these policies, no economic analysis whatsoever with respect to, how is this going to impact investment, jobs, and our families. And that is really I think the hallmark of what we've seen in this federal government that we've had the last 9 years, is it has been all in their own mind environmental focus and no economic focus, and no focus on actually building the economy, the opportunity that we have as Canadians. This is the same focus that we had in Saskatchewan for 70 years. This is the same focus that kept us with a stagnant population, a stagnant economy, and really no growth, and was to Alberta's benefit, who had a different focus, and that's why you see all the Rough Rider jerseys in Calgary.
Yeah, that's true. So you walked out of that meeting?
Oh yeah, we left that meeting along with a few other provinces that walked out as well. A lot of them were, it was a different environment then, with a lot of Liberals and New Democrat provinces there, but even they were ready to walk out because of the how little consultation there was done on the policy. It was really quite remarkable, not only how problematic the policy was itself, but how little consultation had actually occurred, which was added up to zero with all of the provinces. And so that there's a great many provinces that had an issue with that. And when you look at the policies that came in after that, Bill C-69, C-48, they mirrored that time and time again. And that's why you saw provinces that had a significant issue, maybe even when they agreed with the policy, but had a significant issue with actually how it came to be. By the Prime Minister standing in his space, never talking to provinces in any way, gathering all the environment ministers in one room, to essentially inform them that, this is what Catherine McKenna and Justin Trudeau are going to do. And so that policy, it warms my heart to see it come to a demise. And not just because of the economic impact on industry and families. It's a terrible environmental policy.
Yes. Yeah.
Terrible environmental policy. It's a great policy if you're producing oil in Venezuela.
Sure.
It's a great policy if you're producing potash in Russia or Belarus. It's a terrible policy for the most efficient and sustainable oil and gas and potash industries in the world, which happen to be in Saskatchewan and extend oil and gas into Alberta. And so, not only is it an economically terrible policy for Canadian families and industries, it's the worst environmental policy that you could ever introduce. That's why I say their policies came from an environmental focus in their own mind, right? But they're wrong.
Yeah, and it has not worked. The U.S. has seen greater reductions in greenhouse gas emissions than Canada has, and they've had no carbon tax.
By encouraging investment in some of the most sustainable industries on Earth.
Yeah. Exactly.
What a novel idea.
I don't think that Premier Wall and you as finance minister get enough credit nationally for taking a stand against the carbon tax. I mean, we go back. I mean, right now it's in vogue. Every politician, you've got the NDP politicians getting rid of carbon taxes, like in David Eby, BC. But back 2015 to 2017, you had the Liberals in BC, you had the Liberals in Ontario, Quebec, all in favor of cap and trade or carbon taxes. NDP governments in Alberta, even Conservative governments flirting with them in Manitoba. I go back and I remember in Alberta, the Wild Rose being wishy-washy at times on the carbon tax and us having to push them back in line on it, but not Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan from day one, Premier Wall and yourself have been against the carbon tax. Was there at that time, going back to 2016 and taking that stand, being the lone wolf, was there any pushback in caucus, any consideration to take a less aggressive position?
Not in caucus and hardly any in the province. It is very much, like I said, it isn't the government that changed its view of what Saskatchewan is going to look like in the future. It was all of the people. It was very much the same with respect to this. And so we were very solid in caucus, very solid in our communities and in the people that I saw each and every day within the province. And I would say even extending into Alberta and, other areas of the prairies. Other governments, we were, when you went to the 13 subnational governments and the national government, we were a lone voice.
Yeah.
A lone voice. And it was, credit goes to Premier Wall for being a very courageous voice in that time. Even industries at time were, some of them were like, you know what, we can maybe try to make this work. And then they'd have a look at it and say, no, it's going to cost us too much. Well, then let's not let it work.
Right.
And so, Premier Wall really deserves credit for, in my mind, and in my opinion, being one of the most courageous voices on a topic that was cool. We were cool before it was cool, and Premier Wall was a real leader on that. I was at the environment minister's table, kind of a very, very lone voice at that table. When you think about some of the personalities that are still around that table today, federally with Minister Gabot, for example. So, I was at I was the skunk at a garden party at many of those FPT meetings, to say the least. But Premier Wall was the backbone and the courageous voice when it came to said, we just simply aren't going to do it. And, he'd often said, there's in politics, every now and again, you run across, something that is just a damn right idea. And that was it from the get-go. And credit to, Brad Wall, he identified that in the very first day. And I remember the calls we had on that particular day on, when he said, well, what are you still doing in that room? He says, we can't be part of these discussions. And I was more than happy to leave.
That's very good. Well, congratulations. And congratulations on doing that and on being right. So it's great. Staying on the carbon tax topic here, your government made the decision here to challenge the federal law, you order your crown corporations to stop collecting and remitting carbon tax revenue on home heating. What led you to make that, and I've not heard of this being done before, what led you guys to making that sort of monumental decision?
Well, the whole goal. So the whole goal is for the carbon tax to go away. It's a problematic and a terrible policy from an economic perspective, whether it be family, industry, investment attraction, or environmental. And so it needs to go away in its entirety, not just the consumer carbon tax. You know, those are nothing short of really weasel words when you say, oh, we're going to get rid of the consumer carbon tax. Well, there still is heavy emitter carbon tax that needs to go. It's impacting, our industries, their competitiveness, and is really at the core of decreasing those competitive industries from competing with other industries around the world and employing Canadians, and in our case, Saskatchewan people. So it all has to go. And so we're going to continue to push, and credit to all for removing the consumer carbon tax. You're about 40% done. And now what we need to do is we need to remove the rest. And we're going to lead the way on that in every way that we can. And if we have to, take up residence in the Supreme Court of Canada to do it, we've been willing to do that before, and we'll certainly do it again.
Okay, well, let us know. We'll have our lawyers ready as well.
As you have been.
Yes, we're absolutely. Next door in Alberta, they've been a little bit, Premier Smith's been a little bit more hesitant to get rid of the industrial carbon tax. What advice would you give her on this specific industrial side of the carbon tax? Yeah,
is sit down all of the industries one by one and then as groups, and one by one, so that you understand precisely what the impacts are, positive and negative, if they're so be it, and then as groups, so that they actually understand one another's positive and negative impacts. And what you'll find is a willingness to start making investment back and forth. And so here's an example. We have a coal-fired power plant. We put a carbon capture and storage facility on that it was really a large-scale pilot program is what it was, and it's capturing 600,000 to 800,000 tons of carbon each and every year. We're not just putting it in the ground. We're actually selling it to an oil company. They're using it in enhanced oil recovery. And so, we're taking carbon out of the air. That's an advantage for all of us. The real advantage is actually using it in that enhanced oil recovery. It's an economic advantage. It's charging the oil wells that are there, taking an oil field that was actually was deemed to be finished production and has revived it, and now it has no end production date, and it's incredibly productive. And so, here's a very valuable use for carbon. You don't need the carbon tax to have all of that work.
Right.
What you need are economics. And when you get two industries in the room, one has a perceived problem, and one has an opportunity, and you bring those together, you'll actually find solutions. And, that's called innovation. You bring technology to the table and intelligent people, and that's how you attract investment into these types of spaces. So, today, and you pick the product that we produce in Canada, and you'll find somebody that will tell you that it probably is the most sustainable and ethical product that you can find on Earth.
Right.
And so let's get those industries together. Let's continue to make them sustainable, more sustainable in the future, more ethical in the future, of which we're doing by including everyone in the production of our products in Saskatchewan. But you don't need to tax them into submission in order for that to happen. Yes, you have to provide, opportunities for success. And that only comes through, getting people in the room. So that's my advice is be very, very close with your industry and bring up where the challenges are and find your way through it together.
That's good. That's good advice. We'll make sure she sees a copy of this interview. Let me just chronologically back up a bit. 2017, Premier Wall decides he's going to step down as Premier. You toss your hat in the ring to replace him. Was this... were you expecting him to, first of all, make that announcement that he was going to step down? And secondly, had you been thinking about this for a while, that you were maybe going to throw your hat in the ring, or was it you had caucus push you towards that direction, or both?
Yeah, no and no. Yeah. No, I didn't expect it, and no, I didn't intend to run. But as Premier Wall made that decision, there's a number of us in caucus and whatnot that were, talking and thinking. And then you have, external people that we always talk to across the province for whether it be policy advice or what that might be. And then I talked to my wife, and we came to the conclusion that, probably I shouldn't run, and we should, find someone else to support. And then as the conversations evolved over the next week, that decision changed, and my wife had to revisit that decision. And, credit to her, she's been a trooper, because your family...
Oh, yeah.
We only serve in these positions, whether it be as an elected MLA or MP, a minister, or as a leader. You only serve with the love and support of your family. I say that all of the time, and I've certainly have had that from mine.
Now, even the Premier has a boss.
You bet we do. Yeah, I have a number of them. Yeah, I vote. We have I vote last in our family, right behind the dog. So yeah, it wasn't really the intent. It wasn't the intent. And actually, we had even in that short period of time made some decisions to not go into this. But as things changed and the discussion evolved over a number of days, I did have this belief. I always wanted to be there, and it didn't matter in what form or position, to support, that success that I had talked about earlier. I had seen Saskatchewan when it wasn't growing, and I had seen, the very cusp of Saskatchewan starting to grow. And I wanted to support that. And I wasn't fussy about how, and I would serve in any way that was required. And I am, and I continue to this day. But I truly believe that the success of our party moving forward, and I may be biased and politically biased in this, very much is part of, working alongside Saskatchewan people to ensure that we are successful moving forward. We're by no means perfect, and we make oodles of mistakes personally and as a government. We try to fix them as we go. But I do believe that, and So I fundamentally believe that I want to be part of supporting the success of the Saskatchewan Party even today as it moves forward, through the next 3 to 5 to 10 years as well.
So after becoming Premier, what was the most surprising thing you learned about being Premier?
Surprising thing I learned about being Premier. Again, I'd been in the cabinet room for some period of time. Mm-hmm. The scrutiny increased a little bit. I think what I found or valued more, I think even more than when I was a cabinet minister, was I really have a great respect for the people that I work with. Elected, unelected, and then, people even external to government. When you get the right people in a room, a lot of folks will say, you have a stressful job. Well, we all have stressful jobs. I mean, in your own right, what everyone does, there's stress that's involved. I wouldn't say that I have a stressful job. We deal with tough things, and there aren't always easy answers. So sometimes there's not even good answers. However, I have a lot of faith, for example, in my cabinet and my caucus. I have a lot of faith with the people that are working in the various ministers' offices and my office and executive council. And so whatever the problem is, and we've had some zingers over the last 6 or 7 years, whatever the problem might be that morning or that week, I have faith in the people around us that we're going to take the information that we have and we're going to come to the best solution that we can. And then we're going to entirely focus, again, to that point, focus on delivering, what that solution is and achieving what that solution is. And it might change and we'll have to veer off a little bit. But you can only do that when you have actual faith in the decision-making process and the people that are involved in that. And so I became the center of that as opposed to a cabinet minister and a caucus member in the room. And so I think I have a much greater value for that even today is surround yourself with good people that aren't putting work on your plate, but are actually taking it off. And when that's the case, I won't say that work is easy, but you can have faith in the work that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. You mentioned a bunch of zingers. You've had a lot. You've had COVID, you've had inflation, now tariffs. What maybe those aren't even it, but what has been the biggest challenge so far that's been thrown at you as
Yeah, we've had and a few other local tragedies as well as we do across Canada, from time to time. But one very moving one for us in the province is we had a very tragic Humboldt Broncos bus crash. It was in our first year, and never a day goes by that people in Saskatchewan and Canada and around don't think of those families and pray for those families. And so some are very very tragic and very local. And then, we all navigated through a global pandemic. And, that would be an example of every morning you wake up and you're going to have a challenge waiting on your desk.
Yeah.
If you don't learn to have faith in the people around you that are making the decisions and you don't have all the information, all you have is what you potentially have that day. And you're going to have to change it in the future because you're going to have new information in a week or two. And, navigating those are tough times. Mm-hmm. Those are very difficult times. And everyone in public life and in our personal life and our careers, I think we're challenged with what we were faced with at that point in time. Coming since then, supply chains, inflation, which is really a function of the geopolitical changes that we're seeing, and you add to that what's happening in the last number of months, whether it be in North America or the oldest war in the world is alive and well. It really is the only thing that you can be certain of moving forward and waking up tomorrow is that things are going to be a little different than today. And you're going to have to deal with them. And so I'd go back to, having faith in the people around you, whether it be your family, your friends, the people you work with in whatever you do each and every day. And for me, it happens to be, in politics, surround yourself with people that you trust, and capable, competent people that you have faith in. And then you'll have faith in the decisions as you find your way to them. And there's, some are tougher than others. And, we've certainly, I think any political leader of the last number of years has been faced with a number of tough ones. It's not to say that maybe that's the new normal. I don't know.
No, I hope not.
There's been some good things in there too. Sure, we look in our province, and the investment that we see pouring in is at record amounts. Like we have some short-term tough discussions that are happening in Canada and North America and the world. Our medium to long-term outlook, at least for our province, and I would hope for our nation, I'm extremely bullish on where we can get to.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that. Let's talk about tariffs for a second. There's been people on all sides of the political spectrum who have suggested we should be doing counter tariffs on the U.S. We should be fighting back. What's your take on that? Do you think we should be doing counter tariffs of our own on American products?
We've been very apprehensive of supporting any counter tariffs in any way, shape, or form. We have been supportive of some very selective counter tariffs that have been put in place, but we're at a time now where I think we need to just pull back and take a breath. From Canada's perspective, whether it's with our largest trading partner to the south of us or other trading partners, for us, China is a particular issue for Saskatchewan right now with the tariffs that we're facing there and have faced tariffs from that nation before. But we're at a time where I think we need to look at where do we want to get to as Canadians. We're an exporting province. We're an exporting nation. Mm-hmm. And so I think largely we as Canadians support, fair and tariff-free trade with the U.S., with the European Union, with China, with India, with all of these, major countries around the world. For us in Saskatchewan, we export to over 160 countries. So we're very global in our touch and our reach and our interests. But we do want to get to that fair and tariff-free trade environment. And so, as we find our way through really a chaotic discussion the last number of months, I think it's incumbent on us to realize that we may need to lead the way here. Mm-hmm. And we may need to start, backing out of this counter tariff discussion. And here's why. I've been in Washington a number of times. I've been in other places around the world. But in the case of the United States, if there's a tariff that is put in place by the United States government or the Trump administration, what we imply to everyone we meet with is that is going to have a negative impact on American businesses and American families. If we accept that as truth, and I do, a Canadian counter tariff is going to have a negative impact on Canadian businesses and Canadian families. So let's control what we can control. Let's focus on where we want to get to, which is a fair and tariff-free trading environment. And let's start to understand that maybe we're going to have to lead, our trading partners down the path when it comes to that fair and tariff-free trading environment. So we're going to have to start thinking about removing our own.
Yeah, well, that's fair. I mean, and on one of your big products, potash, I've just been gobsmacked that the Trump administration would put a tariff on the main supplier of a very important element in creating fertilizer for growing food for their citizens. I mean, it seems they're not going to be able to pick that up in Iowa or in Florida or anywhere else. Like it's Saskatchewan or Russia? Like where else are they going to get potash?
It's Russia. And you have to, if you could get over the hurdle of actually buying and dealing with Russia,
right?
You'd have to figure out how to get it, on a boat and out of the Black Sea and into a port and into the Midwest where they ultimately use it. But the same is true for all our other products. If you want to pay $10,000 more for a vehicle, put a tariff on vehicles. If you want to pay more for your fuel at the pumps, put a tariff on oil coming in from Canada into Illinois and Ohio, or counter to that, even within our nation. If you want to pay more at the pumps, put a carbon tax on.
Right.
I mean,
it does work. They are able to raise prices that way.
That is the sole impact and effect of carbon taxation. No environmental impact, just gets you to pay a little more when you fuel up.
Exactly. Well, talking about Saskatchewan's bright future, looking at your neighbor in Alberta, Premier Lougheed set up the Heritage Fund back in 1976, ensuring that resource revenues were going in would pay dividends for years to come. I know Premier Smith is committed to enhancing that and putting more money into it. Where's Saskatchewan at? Has Saskatchewan considered this idea, and where's that at in the grand scheme of sort of policy options?
Yeah, we have. We had Peter McKinnon actually do a study on, I believe it was called the Futures Fund a number of years ago, on how could Saskatchewan actually structure a fund, and how would you invest into that fund as a percentage of natural resource wealth, for example, or how could you actually feed that fund over time? And it's not something that is lost to me. Now, we haven't officially set it up, and we haven't been feeding it, but we do have the structure in place should we find our way to that. Now, we talked earlier, we've had some challenges with pandemic and inflation and everything in between there, but I think one of the fundamentals of that particular fund, and I think one of the fundamentals of the future success of Saskatchewan is realizing that we do have natural resource wealth, whether it be ag and value-added ag, and then potash and uranium and lithium and helium and rare earths now and so on. Oil and gas. But as we move forward is to, very much watch what percentage of those natural, let's develop them, first of all, which we're avid and vehement proponents of, develop them. And then let's take that wealth, it comes into the government coffers, whether it be royalty wealth with a very fair environment that attracts investment to develop those resources. But let's be careful about what percentage of that resource wealth we actually spend on activities, healthcare and education services that, yes, people expect, and we should invest a portion of that in there. But when you get over, say you have a high year in oil prices and a high year in potash royalties, and you might, have $1 billion extra or $500 million extra, whatever that might be. Let's set a line where those overages would actually flow into another fund. Now that's, Brad Wallet always said, deficits are, you have to be careful with deficits because they're like potato chips. You can't stop at just one.
Right.
The same goes for, setting up these structured, these structures for government to operate under, because it's very tempting when there's an extra few $1 million to give it to whatever, the latest flavored lollipop is. And so there's, that's very front of mind, in particular this year, as we have some moderate, resource growth. We're going to have some resource investment that's going to come into production in the next number of years. And we have a balanced budget this particular year. It's very much front of mind as to, is this a time for us? Is this an inflection point for us to start to set up a little more regimented structure on how those resource dollars might flow into that futures fund? Mm-hmm. The credit to Peter Lougheed doing something really that, Norway has done it to some degree, ironically, from developing their natural resources,
yes,
funding, their fund, and then, folks like the Canadian government the last number of 9 years say, well, we need to be more like Norway. Well, you're nothing like Norway right now. So there's, we have to, we just be very pragmatic about it, but it's not lost on us.
Yeah, good. Well, I like that. So I'm happy to hear that. Coming out of COVID, Saskatchewan's debt grew a bit from where it was previous, maybe a decade ago. What kind of plan do you have to get it back down? Well,
the first, you have to balance that budget. The second, here is the choice that one might make. There's really three choices. Should you have an overage, what we were just talking, you have a good year with your revenues. Do you put it into a futures fund? Do you take the potato chip and spend it? Or do you pay your debt down?
Right.
And I like the debt repayment. Personally, but the futures fund would be fine in that space as well. Largely the debt in Saskatchewan, we watch this very carefully. Largely the debt in Saskatchewan is infrastructure debt, not operational debt. And that really does matter. And then we have a third, I'd say, debt load, which is on the, they call taxpayer supported debt, but it's on the Crown side, right, where they're investing in infrastructure, and it's paid for by, power rates and things of that nature. So that's a little bit separate from that. But operational debt versus infrastructure debt, those are very, very different. Not being said, you have to watch your infrastructure debt as well. And we are building, and we're building quite aggressively, but we have to keep an eye on it moving forward. We most certainly do, because everybody's debt is increasing. Today I said we have a balanced budget this year. We have actually the highest credit rating in Canada, as it turns out, this past week. And we have, I believe, the second most debt to GDP ratio, which is a ratio. There's still debt there. But, as we look forward, and this may come to light federally sooner rather than later, is to, what is our debt? And what is the 5-year plan on not only servicing the debt, but stopping it from growing, which is step one. And then 2 is, if you can stop it from growing, your economy will grow and your ratios will get better. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal needs to be to reduce and eliminate the debt.
Good. I like to hear that. What accomplishment as Premier are you most proud of?
I think in many cases, and this isn't without, stumbles from time to time, but I try to be as inclusive as possible. I talked earlier about, and this is not an accomplishment. This is an internal operational effort that I try to make. And again, I haven't done it flawlessly by any stretch, but I try to have that team approach. And I said earlier about surrounding yourselves with, strong, competent, capable individuals. And then whatever the problem is you bring the certain individuals that are involved into the room and come up with the best solution and then go for it. That's a little different than many governments operate. And in that room is elected and non-elected people, is it whoever, we think might have something to add to that. And they might be right outside of government as well, from industry or community, and something to add to that conversation. That's a little different approach than maybe, a lot of governments operate in. And I've tried to do that in particular on the larger decisions that we make. And so it's entirely not an accomplishment in any way, shape or form that people would note. It's entirely an internal operating accomplishment that, we talked earlier about, having the fortitude to stand strong, on opposing the carbon tax. This would be one of the reasons that we'd be able to do that, is because I knew it wasn't just me and it wasn't just my voice. It was a voice of a number of trusted people that I had sat with, whether it be in government, outside of government, that were like, this is the right thing to do and you need to do it. And so it gives you a lot more strength when you're out there speaking to whatever the position is that you've taken, that it's the right position.
You mentioned, that you're gonna have a few missteps here and there. If you could go back to your first year as Premier, what's something you'd want to do over? What do you want to do?
First year as Premier. What happened? We had too much happen.
I just meant like any time back in your whole time as Premier, what was one thing you might want to do over?
Well, there'd be a number of things I've said, over the years, little things here and there that I'd like back as well. One thing is a do-over. You got me on that.
Okay.
There's many. I could come up with a list in a short period of time. There's, maybe this. And this wasn't just our government. And there was some requirement for it. But as we found our way through, a very, troubled time in the pandemic and whatnot. There's a lot of money that, public money that started flowing around, whether it be from federal governments and provincial governments, some of it necessary. But we should be very careful before we get into that type of a situation, because it isn't just money. It's taxpayers' money. It's Canadians' money. And that's where some of the debt that we're talking about has arrived from, and some of the some of the more challenging operational deficits that we've had, have been in those years where we're all fighting against some outer power, which is what it seems like the last few months in Canada as well, with the tariff discussion and such. We just need to be careful, I think, to keep things in perspective as we're finding our way through some unknown times and some very challenging times, and just. I'm not saying that money shouldn't flow at certain times, but it shouldn't flow without much discussion, and it shouldn't flow without scrutiny.
I think it's a fair one. Okay, we're almost done here. I got a few last questions for you, easy ones. So maybe these will be easy. You're driving in the car. What's on the radio?
Anything from AC/DC to Kiss to Johnny Cash, actually.
Okay.
And then some of my daughter's dance music from way back, which probably isn't my music, but I love to watch her dance, and whatever song was playing is stuck in my head forever.
That's fair. That's very fair. Any book recommendations? What do you?
Well, I talked a little bit earlier, but King Ralph certainly was a book that I probably read it once a year.
Yeah.
There's another book very much more personal to our province and our party, and it was written by the wife of one of the founding members, Ken Kravetz's wife, Gail. It's called Risk and Reward, and it really is a history of the Saskatchewan Party through the mid-90s up to and into 2007 when they formed government. And so it's really the history of the formation, the first 15 years or so, or 10 years of a party. Until they formed government. We've been fortunate to win 5 times, including that first time. That's a book I read each and every year as well.
I bet.
But outside of that, I'll read various books, and as I said, on political figures, but I'll try to get to both sides, and it brings a new dynamic to the book reading world.
No, fair enough. Yeah. All-time favorite movie?
All-time, Young Guns, maybe Young Blood. Guns, Young Blood.
Yeah. Yeah, good choice. Good choice. Who did you see in your very first concert?
John Cougar Mellencamp.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
Yeah, it was good.
That's a good choice.
Yeah, it was good.
Thank you so much for doing this. This has been a real pleasure.
Hey, thank you, Scott. I appreciate the time.